Ethan Carter was the kind of man everyone assumed had it all. At 33, he was the founder and CEO of a billion-dollar tech company, a regular on magazine covers and top 40 under 40 lists. But behind the polished interviews and motivational speeches was a man filled with doubt, guardedness, and old wounds. 5 years ago, Ethan was in a serious motorcycle accident. Doctors believed he would never walk again. During those dark months, the woman he thought would be his future wife walked out without a word. She vanished as if their love had been buried alongside his paralyzed legs. Though he miraculously recovered, Ethan was never the same. He no longer believed in love. He didn't trust that someone could look at him without seeing money or status. So he created a social experiment, a role. On first dates, Ethan would show up in a wheelchair. He wanted to know if anyone could love him for who he was. No fortune, no reputation, just Ethan. No one knew it was an act, and it seemed no one ever passed the test. Until the fifth time. That Saturday evening, Ethan arrived 15 minutes early, as he always did. The black wheelchair was positioned neatly beside a table at Willow and Vine, a small restaurant that was cozy, tasteful, and unassuming. He always chose places like this, refined enough to avoid suspicion, but not too fancy to draw unwanted attention. When Grace Bennett walked in, Ethan almost didn't recognize her right away. She wore an olive green dress, simple and elegant, with no jewelry. Her hair was tied back casually. There was no red lipstick, no overpowering perfume, just a quiet presence that somehow filled the room. "Are you Ethan Carter?" she asked with a fleeting smile. "Yes, and you must be Grace." "Sorry I'm a little late. Traffic was terrible." "No worries, I just got here," Ethan lied with a smile. She sat down across from him without so much as a glance at the wheelchair. No awkward pause, no subtle wince, just a woman having dinner with a man. And that made Ethan's heart skip a beat. "Do you come here often?" "Actually, it's my first time, but I heard the salmon is great." "I'm more of a steak girl. Do they have anything with mushrooms?" She smiled, eyes alight with curiosity. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Grace spoke about teaching at a small public school on the outskirts of the city, about her energetic yet lovable students and her mother, once a teacher herself now living with arthritis. Ethan listened, not out of politeness, but because he was genuinely drawn into her simple, heartfelt world. Not once did Grace ask about the wheelchair. Not once did she look at him with pity. Only clear eyes, a warm voice, and an open heart. For the first time in years, Ethan forgot he was acting. He just wanted to talk, to listen, and to stay in that moment a little longer. Their next meetings happened naturally. Grace often brought books. Once it was To Kill a Mockingbird. Another time, The Book Thief. They spent hours at a small cafe near the park, talking about literature, her students, and sometimes things neither of them had shared with anyone before. Ethan had crafted a modest life for himself in these stories. Working in administration at a mid-sized company, living in an average apartment, recovering from a car accident 3 years ago. All believable, all completely false. Grace spoke of her mother, Evelyn, who lived with her in a small apartment and was battling arthritis. "She's the reason I became a teacher," Grace said during one quiet moment over tea. "The pay is terrible, but when a student finally understands something, it makes everything worth it." Ethan nodded, trying to hide the shame gnawing at his conscience. Every time Grace opened up, he felt himself shrinking. Her honesty was a mirror, and he hated what it reflected in him. He began therapy, partly because of pressure from Lucille, his sister, who had long warned him about the emotional cost of these experiments, but mostly because Ethan could no longer stand himself. "Why don't you tell her the truth?" Lucille asked one evening, finding him staring at Grace's message. "Because if I do, everything changes." "And if you don't, everything you're building is a lie," she replied, her eyes filled with disappointment. On slow walks through the park, Ethan let Grace push the wheelchair he didn't need. She told him stories of a shy boy who now read poetry aloud, a bullied girl who found her voice. Each story lit something in her, and each step in his deception weighed heavier on him. He was losing control. He could no longer tell where the lie ended and the truth began. And the scariest part was, he wanted it all to be real. That day, Ethan went to Grace's school unannounced. He wasn't in a wheelchair. He wasn't acting. He wasn't pretending. He was just himself, with real legs, real fear, and a fragile resolve trembling in his hands. The school was nearly empty by the time he arrived. Classes had ended, and only distant laughter echoed from the field outside. He knew Grace often stayed late to grade papers or prepare lessons. He hoped today was no different. She was there, in her classroom, standing by the bookshelf, organizing stacks of notebooks. The late afternoon sun filtered through the windows, casting golden light across her hair. When she turned and saw him standing in the doorway, the book in her hands slipped and hit the floor. Even, her voice was barely a whisper. Her eyes flicked from his face to his legs and back again, as if trying to make sense of something that shouldn't be true. "I can explain," he said, his voice shaky. "You can walk?" she said, disbelieving. He nodded. "I need to tell you everything, the whole story." Grace didn't speak for a few seconds. Then slowly she stepped forward and picked up the book. "Everything?" Her voice was sharper now. "Then go ahead. Start from where, when you decided to pretend to be disabled?" Ethan closed his eyes for a second, breathing deeply. "At first, it was just an experiment, a way to test people. I didn't trust anyone anymore, not after what I'd been through. And then you met me, so you thought continuing to lie was the smart move?" Her voice wasn't angry anymore. It was hurt, quiet, clear. "I wanted to tell you so many times, but I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of losing you." She gave a dry, hollow laugh. "You've already lost me, Ethan, not because you can walk, but because you never gave me the chance to love someone real." He started to step forward, but she moved back, raising a hand to stop him. "You stole my choice. You created a version of yourself I never truly knew, then hoped I'd fall for that illusion." Silence fell between them like a heavy curtain. Ethan looked into her eyes, and for the first time, what he saw wasn't anger, it was heartbreak. Ethan stood alone in the empty classroom after Grace walked out. He didn't remember how she left, only that he stood frozen, as if his body refused to move. Like every word she had spoken had turned into invisible chains holding him in place. The room felt colder suddenly, so quiet that the ticking clock echoed like a heartbeat out of rhythm. He used to think he could control everything, the narrative, the emotions, even the outcome. But now, with the final mask stripped away, he realized the thing he feared most wasn't abandonment, it was being fully seen and still unloved. For the first time in years, Ethan felt exposed. Not the successful man on magazine covers, not the man in the wheelchair deserving sympathy, just a lonely man aching to be forgiven. And he knew then, words weren't enough anymore. It was time to stop, step back, and face himself, with the truth unshielded by any performance. Ethan left the classroom like a man untethered. No plan, no direction, just a growing emptiness swelling in his chest like a quiet storm. He didn't call for a car, didn't return to the office. Instead, he walked for blocks without knowing where he was going. Grace's voice echoed in his mind, not the anger, but that final, calmly delivered blow. "You never gave me the chance to love the real you." That night, Ethan sat in his penthouse, staring out at a city full of lights that now meant nothing. On the table lay a blank sheet of paper. He had tried to write something, then crumpled it, and tried again, dozens of times. But this time, he stopped trying to make it perfect. He simply wrote. No guardrails, no script, just truth. "Grace, I'm not writing this letter to ask for forgiveness. I know that apologies without change are just another form of avoidance. I'm writing because you deserve to know why. even if it can't erase the pain I caused. 5 years ago, I had an accident. The woman I loved left. When I recovered, she came back, as if nothing had happened. Since then, I've lost faith in people's eyes, in the meaning of affection. I began my experiments, wore masks, played roles, all to prove no one truly cared for the man beneath what I owned. Then you came along, and everything changed. I was scared that if you knew who I really was, you'd leave too. Scared to lose the rare feeling of being treated like just a man. Scared I didn't deserve your kindness. I was wrong, and that hurts more than anything else. Thank you for making me want to be real again. No performances, no hiding. He folded the letter, slipped it into a plain white envelope. No logo, no scripted signature. The next day, he delivered it to her school himself. No longer Ethan, the CEO, just Ethan, a man carrying a late confession. Grace received the letter on a Wednesday afternoon after her last class. A colleague brought it into the teacher's lounge and placed it on her desk. The moment she recognized his handwriting, her heart skipped a beat. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she tucked it in her bag, took it home, left it on the kitchen table, and stared at it like it might explode at any moment. That night, once her mother had gone to sleep, Grace carefully opened the envelope. She read every word slowly, then read it again and again. There were no excuses, no manipulation, just the raw honesty of someone learning how to take off his masks. She didn't cry, but when she folded the letter, her hands trembled slightly. Friday morning, while grading her students' essays, she opened her phone and typed a short message. I received your letter. My class has a final presentation today at 4 p.m. If you want to come, you'll be welcome. She wasn't expecting anything. No promises, no second apologies. But she knew that if he came, it wouldn't be another performance. And when Ethan read her message, something stirred inside him. Not forgiveness, but hope, a small door. But this time he knew if he wanted to walk through it, he'd have to knock with nothing but his real self. That afternoon, he arrived early. No wheelchair, no chauffeur, just himself. In a plain button-down shirt, carrying a small bouquet of wild daisies. He sat in the last row of the school auditorium, surrounded by parents, teachers, and students. Grace moved along the side of the stage, adjusting the microphone, her eyes never once drifting toward him. The presentations began. The children recited poetry, performed short plays, shared reflections. Ethan didn't remember every performance, but he remembered Grace's face as she watched her students. Warm, proud, and unmistakably real. When the final act ended and the audience rose in applause, Grace finally turned. Their eyes met. She gave a small nod, no smile, no avoidance, just a nod, enough for Ethan to understand. The door, however narrow, had begun to open. They didn't need words after the presentation. No explanations, no apologies, just a silence that held everything unsaid. And still, something new. But the next morning, Ethan received a message. If you're free tonight, I'm cooking dinner, just something simple. My mom will join us too. It took Ethan a few seconds to realize those words weren't just an invitation to eat. They were the beginning of something real. That night's dinner was simple: tomato pasta, toasted bread, and warm tea. Evelyn, Grace's mother, watched him carefully at first, then nodded approvingly when he patiently served her vegetables. No one mentioned the wheelchair. No one mentioned the past. They talked about favorite books, the little persimmon tree on the balcony, and the moody spring weather. Evenings like that became a pattern, not frequent, but steady. Ethan grew used to the small, cozy world Grace lived in, and she, in turn, began appearing in his world, not at glitzy galas, but in his modest office, where he'd hung a child's drawing Grace once received from a student. One afternoon, Ethan handed her an envelope. No ring, no luxury apartment key, just 2 plane tickets to Vermont, where Grace's grandmother used to live. I thought, we could go find a piece of your past together, he said. She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. That evening, they sat on the small balcony under soft golden lights and the hush of wind brushing the rooftops. "I used to think I had to become someone perfect to be loved," Ethan said quietly. "And now?" Grace asked. "Now I just want to be myself and see if that's enough." She was silent for a moment, then took his hand. "Let's find out together, no rush, no pretending." They sat there, side by side, no promises, no masks, just honesty. The trip to Vermont wasn't luxurious. It was intimate and warm. They wandered down maple-lined country roads, visited the small library where Grace's grandmother once worked, and chatted with an old neighbor who still remembered little Grace with messy hair running around with books in her hands. Ethan didn't try to impress. He was simply there, fully present, when she cried outside the old house, now owned by strangers. When she laughed upon finding a letter her grandmother had hidden inside a tattered book. In those moments, love didn't need words. It quietly bloomed through presence and sincerity. When they returned, their love wasn't cinematic. It was peaceful, like a morning cup of tea, like sunlight quietly pouring through the window. No daily vows, no grand declarations, just steady presence, gentle rhythms, and a feeling of home. Then one bright summer morning, Ethan invited her to the beach. They walked along the shoreline, hand in hand, the sea breeze salty, the sun warm. When Grace turned to him, Ethan was already kneeling. No speech, no preamble, just a simple ring and eyes that said everything. "The first time I met you, I was hiding behind a mask. Now I'm standing here, flawed, honest, and real. Will you walk this imperfect life with me just as we are?" Grace laughed through her tears. "I've always wanted that," she whispered and nodded. They married in a small ceremony in Grace's mother's backyard. Evelyn sat in the front row, holding Lucille's hand. The sister who always believed in goodness. Grace's students sang her a song, and her colleagues brought wildflowers instead of fancy bouquets. No press, no stage, just honest smiles, warm embraces, and hearts genuinely happy for them. And at the center of it all, two people who once hid behind fear and fiction had finally found each other, not through performance, not through protection, but through love, quiet, honest, and complete. Because sometimes the bravest love begins where the lies end.